production technician. So essentially what that means is I go into work in the morning. I have a list of samples that I'm told that need to be tests they need to be run by, and then I get everything ready. I run the tests. I get the raw data. I put that into a template. I generate the results, and I send it off to my boss.
Awesome. Okay. So you did kind of go through a little bit. Is that kind of explicitly like what you do as your daily routine, pretty much every day?
Yeah.
Yeah. It seems pretty accurate.
It's very much of an everyday thing.
Yeah. So kind of with that, what is your most significant cause of interference with completing your job?
I spend way too much time writing stuff down, or having to go over like the same information over and over and over again from the different areas of where I'm at. So like, when I get the samples, I put them in my computer, but I also put them in my lab notebook. And for the protocol, it's in a binder on my desk, but I also have it written in my lab notebook every day, depending on what test or which protocol I need. And then like going back and putting in all the results, I have to get them. I have to put them in an Excel document that I can then email to myself, and then get that into the file that has the sample IDs and hope that it's in the right order. And it's just, it can be frustrating, having to go from like system to system and emailing a whole bunch of stuff to myself all the time. It's annoying.
For sure, yeah. So are there any tools right now that you use that make your job a little easier?
The emailing to myself, that's really pretty much it. I mean, I use Excel. I have a template for it. It's a very bare bones template. That just, I feed in the raw data, and I have an equation that I sometimes have to tinker with, and it spits me out my results. So basically what I do is every day I kind of, depending on what test I do, the last test that I did, I'll like go in and delete those samples and put in new sample IDs, and then kind of the same thing and like save it under a different file name.
All right.
So, which if I have to tweak the results a little bit, like the calculations a little bit, then yeah, I have to make sure I remember to tweak them back. It was frustrating.
So I know you're working in this every day, so is there any way that you've kind of thought about this, maybe a way to make it easier for yourself?
Magic. Magic would be, no, that would be awesome. Something that's just kind of like, I only have to have the sample IDs input once kind of a thing, and I can access it from either a computer in the lab or my computer, rather than having to like email myself stuff. Kind of like a central network sort of system that like everybody can access. So like whenever production or the development has created an assay, it's gone through the proper FDA channels, then they just kind of put it on that system, and then I don't have to worry about anything. I can just say, refer to document so-and-so. And I don't have to worry about writing it down, or if I need to like double check, I can just pull it up on a lab computer if I need to, rather than having to write it down in my lab notebook, or like run back to my computer, which, you know, having to gloves off, coat, like, yeah, no, that's frustrating. Yeah, just something that kind of like is basically a suppository of everything that we might need. So what samples are being done that day, what samples are in the system that need to be done, the different protocols and are like updated, if they've been updated or not, or if they've been changed at all. And then like kind of a suppository of all historical samples. So like if I have to go back to find a sample, like say my boss is like, hey, I want you to look at sample such and such. Right now I have to go through my many different lab notebooks to find it and figure out what date it was, and then I can go online and get that result. So I haven't been there long, and I have a lot of notebooks already that I've gone through. It like one notebook pretty much lasts maybe 2 months.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right, so kind of just for clarity on my sake really quickly, so you said you have a computer in the lab physically, and then you also have your other computers that just kind of have a desk outside of the physical lab?
Yeah, it's a cubicle. It's where we like run our analysis and whatnot. So the analysis is just the computations. So anything else is done in the lab. So.
All right, cool. And then you also said kind of like glove off. So what kind of are the physical restrictions maybe of like, what are you kind of wearing of like gloves or things like that that might hinder entering something into a computer that let's say if it's like a touch screen, maybe?
Touch screens with our gloves, we probably wouldn't want to do because it'd get the screen all dirty.
Yeah.
So we don't have touch screens in our lab. It's just generic computers, desktops.
Okay.
So I think they're Windows 7, I think, but I think they're trying to change things over to Windows 10, so some of them might be 10 by now. I don't use all the computers, just there are certain tests that I'm qualified for, so as of right now, there's like an even mix of 7 and 10. I have one of the newer laptops though, so I got a Windows 10 laptop, which is awesome.
Very cool.
But, yeah.
Quick question. Would you prefer like typing or like handwriting?
To be completely honest, I would, in terms of after the test itself is done, and before the test starts, I do not want to be using a pen at all.
Okay.
But during the test, if I have to make some minor adjustments, I need to be able to have like the freedom of being able to just jot it down in my notebook and then go back and make a note of it.
Okay.
Whenever I'm going through the data and kind of like using the calculations to get the actual result versus just the raw data form.
Okay. So during the lab, is it very inconvenient to like use keyboard or is it?
Keyboards are fine. Mouses, the computer mice are fine, and we always have gloves on. It's never like we don't have gloves on, so we can't exactly touch it. And because the stuff stays in the lab, we don't have to worry about contamination or like sanitation or anything else like that. It's just that obviously if you have stuff on your gloves and you touch the screen, we can't see. But yeah, keyboards and mice are fine.
Okay.
I have a question. How often do you take your work home with you?
I don't take my work home with me ever.
Good. Okay.
Yeah, honestly, like, if there's anything that I need to take home with me, yeah, that just doesn't happen.
Okay.
Like maybe a notebook or something that's just kind of like, Jackie, think about this, but I don't have to think in my job, so yeah, don't worry about it.
Cool.
So kind of with that then of how do you currently circumvent kind of this issue of like writing down and keeping all these different things? Are you just writing it down in a notebook, writing it on one computer, writing it differently on a different computer? And
for my records, like I have it written, I try to have it written as close as they need it, like my boss would need it, but that doesn't always work if I have to like switch things around because someone added something later and it's like I have to add that on to things, but it gets kind of confusing. So I try to keep what's for me that'll stay in my documents as close to what I'm sending as possible, but it doesn't always work. Sometimes I have to fudge the format there a little bit. What I write in my lab notebook, I try to keep as close as possible to what I'm going to do on the computer. But again, that doesn't always happen. Like I can sometimes get in like samples that they're like, don't test these yet, but they'll already be in the queue, and it's like, thanks. That's awesome. Now I have to keep an eye on that, make sure that I don't put results on those that aren't tested, so that can be frustrating. Yeah.
Have you considered to try and solve this before at all? So I know you're currently kind of also emailing yourself, but have you thought of any solution for it, or have you actually attempted one?
There's really not much that we can do. I mean, I don't really know computers all that well. I mean, you can use basic Excel. I can get on the internet. I can read forums. Whether or not that means I can do anything is completely different. Mainly that's kind of like, I guess my bosses are really more on that. I'm still relatively new, so I've just been kind of getting into the swing of things, although now that I'm in the swing of things, I feel like my brains are leaking out. So, yeah, something that can kind of, I'll admit I wouldn't mind having like a program that's really relatively easy to use, so like people who aren't computer literate can use it just fine, but it's also something that I can play around with whenever I start getting more time, since I'm not writing everything down. So, yeah.
So we're looking to get you back as much time as we can. So kind of with that then, is there a technology, maybe even from like a different field or like forms that you've seen that you might think could be helpful or kind of implement parts of them into this solution?
The only thing I can think of is like, I'll admit it's because I see it in movies all the time, like with samples coming in, you like obviously as the sample comes in, it'll have a barcode, and you just scan the barcode, and then poof, it's in the computer system. And then whenever it's testing, you scan the barcode, poof, it's in the computer system under testing, and then when it goes in cold storage, again, scan the barcode. There, like, but that's just like something computer-wise. There's got to be something easier than just that, but that was really the most that I ever thought about it.
How do you currently keep track of the whereabouts of samples?
We don't really. I mean, like,
Okay.
we get in a sample, it gets tested, and then it goes in cold storage. I try to keep, like, their bins, so I'll try to write the bin number in my lab notebook that I used that day for putting all those samples, but there's really not a good, like, if someone were to have gone in and moved the sample, I wouldn't know about it, so I would, like, if it had changed, I wouldn't know.
Okay.
And since I'm not the only one who has access, that's something that can easily happen. So we don't really have a good tracking system right now.
So with that, we've definitely talked about kind of the problem with writing everything down and keeping things the same on kind of different systems, and also then kind of physically, where do we know where the samples are? Are there any other problems that you can think of that kind of arise on your day-to-day basis?
Not really. I mean, mainly it's just like being able to get the results input in like a quick and easy manner, without having to email myself a billion times. Being able to look up old results in case if I need to, rather than having to dig through my notebook. Just keeping track of samples. One thing that would be nice is if like if the development team decides that they like. They see something wrong with the test and they decide to upgrade it or change it or whatever, and then it goes through FDA and it gets approved as a change. Maybe like a notification as soon as it's edited would be nice, because they don't always, like, that information doesn't always trickle down to us lowly peons all that quickly. I don't want to run a test that is obsolete and then I'd have to redo it. It just wastes time. So those are pretty much like the main big things for what would be useful for people in my line of work.
Yeah, sure. That's who we're making it for. So, is there anything else that's kind of important for us to know, you think? So I know there are things like the gloves or things we wouldn't be able to know unless kind of you told us.
Not really. I mean, in terms of the program itself, I mean, whether we're wearing gloves or not, it's not going to really affect it. So, we don't really deal a whole lot with changing things. So ours is really more of a plug and chug. We're the calculators of the lab world. So, yeah, like we don't have to deal with FDA regulations or anything because by the time that we get the test, it's already gone through all that. So, I don't really think so.
So tell me more about these lab notebooks and what you actually write in, because I'm a little unclear on. I know you keep track of.
It?
Yeah, because it seems like you write everything you do in these lab notebooks.
Pretty much. I start out the day. I write down a protocol of what test I'm going to run. Mm-hmm. So that if it's an involved test, it can take a while. And then I write down what the sample IDs are of the samples that I'm doing, and I put them like in an order so that I can keep track of which sample is which. If there are any layouts, I'll put down information like that. Extractions, solvents, reagents, buffers, different things like that. I'll write down that information if that test calls for amounts of those. I'll write down any observations that I see during the course of the test. So obviously, like if I see something that doesn't look like it's going quite right. Once you do a test a lot, you begin to notice these kind of things. The differences that are going to appear. So if I see anything that's out of the ordinary, I make a note of it under the observations. If I have to tweak the test, I go back up to my protocol and I'll make note of that, like in the margins, or a red pen over top or just something like that so that it's obvious to me that I made a change. Like for some reason I may have had to change the ratio of the dilution, or I let a timer go for too long, so the reaction went longer than anticipated. Those kind of like small changes, not as in I'm changing the actual protocol, but human error, basically. So I'll keep note of those in the notebook. Date, obviously. Yeah, That's pretty much.
Is there any specific format you have to follow, or is it just kind of free writing as you're doing it, and as long as there's enough information to trace it?
What I do, well, I wrote my protocol very much in the way like people would do lab reports. So I have my protocol up top, and then my samples. I make a table for that. Mm-hmm. So I'll have like sample number. I'll have sample ID. And then depending on the test, whatever additional information I need for like weighouts or spikes, buffers, anything else like that, that will go in that table as well. So that I kind of try to keep fairly organized and kind of clear and concise. It's not really necessarily freehand or free written. Observations are very much so, because obviously I don't always have to write anything down, because there are some days where, hey, a test actually runs the way it's supposed to. So that one's more a bit free written, but other than that, it's kind of, I follow a very basic system: protocol, samples, observations.
Okay. At the beginning, you briefly mentioned something about, you come in and you're told the test that you're supposed to run. How do you know what samples you're supposed to run them? What samples you're supposed to run the tests on, and what tests you have to perform?
My boss tells me.
Okay, and just point to a box and say those are your samples.
Well, we have like an area where all the new samples are. I go in and find them, basically. Okay. The IDs, what he gives me, are supposed to be the same ones that are on the samples. If they're not, then we have issues. But
sure.
I've never had that really be a problem yet. Mm-hmm. So yeah. So he just tells me what the samples are, and then I go and get them. They're all delivered to the lab, so they're in the lab whenever I get there. I don't have to go far.
Okay.
And then with that, for kind of which tests you run on them, so are you given like a name of the test, or like do you have an ID number or something for what test to run on the samples?
Just the name of the test.
So there's a name for each kind of test that you run? Okay.
Yeah.
Do you find yourself running multiple tests on the same sample sometimes? Like splitting the sample up and doing multiple tests?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that can happen. Depending on like if they want to, like, a patient wants to do a bunch of different tests. They'll do the vials of blood. They'll send them to us. We split up those vials of blood for the different tests. I don't do all tests. I know like roughly 5. I think there's one that I'm working on, like being trained on. So if there's a test that they need that I don't know, it'll go to somebody else, but I'll do the test that I know, kind of a thing. So yeah, there'll be like multiple samples of the same thing, but they won't necessarily all be used by me.
Okay. I just had a question. What was it? Come back to me.
We're almost done, but I did want to go back to something. You were talking about the format that you write your lab notebook in. As far as you know, is that how all the other production techs do it?
Lab notebooks are pretty much kind of a per person basis, but that seems to be a fairly regular formula. Mainly because like you start out with protocol, then you have samples, and then you have results, and the observations are typically seen more with results. So it kind of flows better that way. You're not trying to put stuff down, like, the timeline sort of a thing. Follows the timeline.
All right.
I remember my question. So that, if I remember correctly, the way I understand it, this whole operation has to be FDA Part 11 compliant. Are there any additional compliances that a lab tech would have to follow?
No, just basic lab safety, like OSHA standards. We don't have to worry really about regulations, because by the time the stuff gets to us, it's already passed through all that.
Okay.
So, yeah, we get the easy job. We're just say go do, and we do. So yeah.
So during lab, do you refer to the protocol a lot? Do you like print it out and?
If it's a test that I'm still fairly new at, yes, I will.
Okay.
If it's a test that I've done 200 to 300 times, no, I won't. So that's why it's kind of like just being able to have the protocol in a major system and like a main system, so I don't have to write it in my notebook, would be fantastic.
So currently, you have to like write it out every time you perform a test, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's very frustrating.
Is it like really long or?
Depending on the protocol, it can be anywhere from 1 to 3 pages long.
Okay.
It's very frustrating.
Yeah. Okay, I understand that.
Awesome. Looks like we're out of time, but thank you again very much for spending the time. And definitely gave us a lot of really useful information, so that should be great.
This is your email, right?
Thank you.
Yeah, if you have any questions, you can go ahead and email me.
All right, thank you.
Hey. Thank you so much.
Well, have a good afternoon.
You as well.
Okay.
Just chilling out in the CS labs or private